There was a time when muscle cars weren't about rarity. They were about sound, stance, swagger. You didn't buy one to impress your neighbors. You bought one to smoke them at the next red light. But not every muscle car got its flowers. Some were built in the shadows, forgotten by the magazines, dismissed by collectors, until now. These are the machines that flew under the radar for decades, but today, they're finally getting their revenge. First up, the 1970 Chrysler 300 Hearst. On the surface, it looked like a luxury barge, long, wide, and heavy. But pop that hood and the story changed real quick. Inside was a 440 cubic inch TNT V8 making 375 horsepower and a brutal 480 pound-feet of torque. This wasn't some badge job, it was co-developed by Hearst Performance, the same people behind the legendary Olds 442 shifters. Only around 500 of these beasts were built, all wearing white and gold with a massive hood scoop and hidden headlights. People laughed until it beat them in a straight line. Then there's the 1971 Ford Torino GT with the 429 Cobra Jet. Everyone drools over the Talladega or the Super Cobra Jet variants, but this one, it was the real street sleeper. Ford underrated that 370 horsepower 429 so it wouldn't scare buyers near insurance agents. Mated to a close ratio 4-speed and a 3.91 rear, this car could run low 14 seconds all day long. It didn't get the same press as the Mustang, but make no mistake, on the drag strip this Torino was pure bad news. Most folks were too busy looking for bosses to realize this thing was just as deadly and twice as rare. Slide over to AMC territory and you'll find the 1970 Rebel Machine, a loud, outrageous red, white, and blue middle finger to the big three. Only about 2,300 units were built and every one of them came with a 390 V8 putting out 340 horsepower. The machine was AMC's answer to the GTO, but it brought more than just patriotism. With a functional hood scoop, a factory tack, and a performance suspension, it was built for drag duty. And because AMC wasn't exactly a household performance name, most people didn't take it seriously until it started gapping them. Next, the 1973 Pontiac Grand Am 455. Yes, a Grand Am. Before the name got dragged through decades of front-wheel drive shame, it meant something. The 73 model came with a 455 cubic inch V8 pushing over 250 net horsepower, which was seriously stout for the smog-choked mid-70s. Radial tuned suspension, a shaker hood, and one of the meanest front fascias ever put on a GM car. It was supposed to take on European sports sedans. Pontiac tried to give Americans BMW performance with GTO muscle. People didn't buy it, but collectors now are starting to wake up. You want weird? Try the 1975 Buick Century Free Spirit. Built as a pace car tribute for the Indy 500, this thing came covered in stars, stripes, and full bicentennial energy. But it wasn't just a paint job. It had a 455 V8 under the hood with low compression but enough torque to snap necks, massive T-tops, loud graphics, and only about 1,300 of them ever built. It was Buick's way of saying, yeah, we can still party. It sat on dealer lots for years. Now, people are hunting them down like buried treasure. And speaking of buried, I'd meet the 1971 Dodge Charger Super B 446 pack. Most people think the Super B died with the Coronet, but Dodge moved it to the Charger in '71 and kept the attitude. With the legendary 6-pack setup, that's 3 2-barrel carbs feeding a 440 Magnum, it made 385 horsepower and ran the quarter in the low 14 seconds. Easy. Production numbers, just around 5,000 total Super Bs that year, and only a fraction of them got the 6-pack. Everyone was still lusting after Hemis. Meanwhile, this thing was doing real damage at a discount. Let's not forget the 1970 Mercury Cyclone spoiler. It looked like the cousin of the Torino, but it hit harder. A 429 Cobra Jet was standard, with ram air and a hood scoop built to inhale asphalt. Just over 1,600 made, and yet barely anyone talks about them. This was Mercury's NASCAR homologation effort. A car built to meet the track halfway, but it was released too late. Muscle was on the ropes. The EPA and rising insurance rates strangled it in the cradle. Today they're like ghosts, mean ones. Mopar lovers, here's one for you. The 1974 Plymouth Duster 360. No, it wasn't a Roadrunner or a Cuda, but it was light, compact, and had a legit 360 cube small block with 245 net horsepower. Remember, in 74, net ratings were killing everyone, so that 245, it was real. This thing could run high 14s in the quarter with a good driver, and it cost way less than the big boys. While everyone else was chasing badges, the Duster 360 was cleaning up at local tracks, and doing it with no ego. Another forgotten gem, the 1972 Oldsmobile Rally 350. Bright yellow, color-matched bumpers, and aimed squarely at the youth market. It wasn't built for brute power. Its 350 V8 made 310 horsepower gross, but it came with performance suspension, dual exhaust, and a TH350 that could hold its own. Olds only made around 3,500 of these bright yellow screamers, and while it was mocked for looking like a lemon at the time, collectors now realize it was one of the boldest moves Oldsmobile ever made, especially when everyone else was going beige. And we're not done. There's the 1976 Pontiac Ventura Sprint, which sounds like a grocery getter, until you realize it was Pontiac's way of sneaking performance back into the lineup under the radar. It came with a high output 350, rally wheels, a sport suspension, and stripes that let you know it meant business. It wasn't a true GTO, but in the GTO's absence, it carried the torch quietly. These are getting rare, fast, and they still sell under the radar. There's underrated, and then there's invisible. That's where the 1971 Pontiac T3745 HO lives. Most folks never even heard of it, but under its plain Jane skin was a monster. Pontiac dropped in their 455 high output engine, the same one used in the GTO Judge, rated at 335 horsepower, but rumored to put out well over 400. This thing was light, stripped down, and deadly in a straight line. Fewer than 300 were ever made with that combo. No badges, no stripes, just power, wrapped in complete anonymity. Now swing over to Chevrolet, and let's talk about the 1973 Chevelle SS 454. Not the one from 70 everyone drools over, but this one, post-peak, when GM was trying to hold on to performance with both hands. Even with lower compression and stricter emissions, the big block still pushed out solid torque and could scoot when tuned right. The A-body was getting heavier, sure, but these later SS models still had bite. People passed on them for years, but clean examples now, they're getting snatched up fast. Then there's the 1971 AMC Hornet SC/360, 1 year only. Built as a budget performance car to slot below the Rebel machine, it featured a 360 cubic inch V8 making 245 horsepower, net, not gross. So it was respectable for the time. Light, nimble, and incredibly rare, with only about 784 ever built. It had no business being that fast in a compact body, and even fewer people expected it. If the Rebel machine was a patriotic punch in the face, the Hornet SC360 was a sucker punch. Fast, dirty, and over before you saw it coming. And how about the 1974 Dodge Dart Sport 360 Hang 10? Sounds like a surfboard ad, right? But this thing came with the 360 V8, a performance axle, and sport suspension, and a wild white interior with orange shag carpet and bucket seats. Dodge was clearly trying to market it to the California crowd. It didn't work. Fewer than 500 were ever made with the full performance package. Today, it's one of the quirkiest, most collectible Dart variants out there, and one of the few you'll ever see with a surf theme and a burnout at the same time. Let's not forget the 1971 Mercury Comet GT 302. Think of it as the Maverick's forgotten twin, except this one had a meaner edge. With a 302 under the hood, a functional hood scoop, stripes, and a sport suspension, it was a scrappy little street fighter in a cheap tux, built to take on Novas and Dusters, and in some ways, it did, but Mercury never pushed it hard. It faded into obscurity. These days, it's one of the cheapest ways to get a V8 powered early 70s muscle car, but that won't last. Over in Oldsmobile land, you had the 1973 Hurst Olds W30, a strange mix of luxury and street performance. It came with the 455 Rocket V8, full Hurst badging, a dual gate shifter, and a white and gold paint scheme that looked like a championship ring on wheels. Only 1,097 were made, and most people dismissed them as too flashy, too soft. But that engine was no joke. These cars could move. And in a world where GTOs and 442s get all the love, the Hurst Olds stands alone, dressed to kill. And speaking of forgotten heat, how about the 1972 Ford Maverick Grabber 302? The Maverick wasn't born to be a muscle car, but Ford tried anyway. The Grabber was their attempt to inject some attitude into an economy coupe. With the optional 302, dual exhaust, and rally suspension, it actually had some real performance cred. People mocked it for looking like a shrunken Mustang. But today, clean V8 Grabbers are rising in value fast, especially when you realize how few survived in decent condition. Digging deeper, there's the 1976 Pontiac Le Mans Can-Am. Built as a swan song to Pontiac's performance era, this car had a 200 horsepower 400 V8, rally wheels, a shaker hood scoop, and a white paint job with wild stripes. Just over 1,100 were made before a mold broke at the factory, ending production early. It's one of the most obscure Pontiacs ever made, and now one of the most desirable for collectors who know what to look for. Let's get really weird. The 1977 Dodge Aspen RT Super Pack. By this point, the muscle era was basically over, but Dodge tried to keep the dream alive with this bizarre, square-bodied compact muscle coupe. It had a 360 cubic inch V8, blackout trim, stripes, spoilers, and just enough attitude to remind people of what came before. Production numbers were low, survivors are even rarer, but with Mopar prices climbing across the board, these oddballs are finally getting a second look. And if you really want to turn heads, look no further than the 1975 Chevrolet Laguna Type S3. Most folks think of it as a NASCAR aero car, and they're not wrong, but on the street it was a comfortable cruiser with some hidden muscle. You could get it with a 400 or 454 engine, sport suspension, and those swoopy fender lines that screamed mid-70s performance. It was never meant to be a drag car, but it had style, speed, and a silhouette that's now one of the rarest in Chevy's playbook. And now let's take it way off the beaten path. The 1971 Plymouth GTX 440 Plus 6. Everyone talks about the Hemi cars, but the 6-barrel 440S were just as nasty, and in many cases quicker off the line thanks to better low-end torque. The GTX was a gentleman's muscle car. Sharp styling, leather interior, power everything. But with the 6-pack option, it was a street brawler in a 3-piece suit. Production was limited, survivors even more so, and for years they were forgotten while everyone chased Cudas. Then there's the 1973 Mercury Montego GT. Overshadowed by the Cougar and the Torino, the Montego GT came with optional 351 or 429 V8s, Magnum 500 wheels, and sport trim that hinted at real performance. Few were sold, even fewer were cared for, but for the Ford guys who wanted something different, this was the answer. Clean examples today are almost impossible to find, but if you do, don't hesitate. These weren't halo cars. They weren't built to dominate showroom floors or headlines. They were background players. Until they weren't. Every single one of these machines was overlooked in its time, but now they're becoming collector gold, not because they were the fastest, but because they were unique, unpolished, and built for people who didn't need everyone else's approval. Let's take this all the way back to the 1972 Oldsmobile Rally 350, a car built with one purpose: dodge insurance premiums while still giving you a proper muscle car hit. Finished in Sebring yellow with color match bumpers, spoiler, and rally stripes, it looked like a race car, but under the hood was a 350 V8 rated at 310 horsepower tucked inside a Cutlass body. It wasn't the fastest thing on the street, but it gave you the look and feel without the Hemi level insurance hike. Only around 3,547 were ever made. For years, people ignored it. Now, it's one of the hottest sleeper investments in the Olds world. And speaking of investment-grade obscurities, how about the 1977 Pontiac Firebird Esprit Redbird? Everyone talks about the Trans Am, but the Esprit Redbird was a secret-style bomb. It didn't come with a monster engine, but it had flair, red trim, gold accents, and Firebird attitude in a more refined package. Think of it as the mullet in a suit. Under 3,000 were made with the Redbird package, and they've become cult favorites, especially with collectors tired of overpaying for TAs. Let's pivot to something even wilder. The 1970 Ford Falcon 429 Cobra Jet. Not the Aussie one, the American one. Final year of the Falcon nameplate. Final shot of real muscle. Most Falcons were economy cars, but this thing, it was a sledgehammer. Ford stuffed a 429 CJ under the hood, rated at 370 horsepower, and gave it zero advertising. Less than 1,000 were built with this combo. A true factory freak. These days, they're nearly impossible to find, and when you do, it's always a story worth hearing. Then there's the 1973 Dodge Charger SE Brougham 400, the kind of car that got laughed at when gas prices spiked and horsepower ratings dropped. But hear this, while the world pivoted to economy, Dodge quietly kept shoving big blocks into luxury coupes. The SE Brougham wasn't built for burnouts, it was built for the guy who wanted a little muscle wrapped in vinyl and chrome. The 400 cubic inch V8 still had torque. And today, survivors are rare. Most got junked or turned into parts cars. But for those in the know, these Broughams are rising stars. And now, one of the rarest wildcards in the muscle scene, the 1971 Baldwin Motion Phase 3 Camaro. Baldwin Motion was never about volume, they were about violence. Joel Rosen's crew took factory Camaros, yanked the motors, and turned them into guaranteed 11-second street machines. The Phase 3 package was the top tier build, 454 cubic inches, monster carbs, racing suspension, and an ironclad promise from Motion. If it didn't run the number, they'd buy it back. Less than 12 were ever built. That's not rarity, that's unicorn status. Let's keep going with the 1975 Bricklin SV1. Technically Canadian, technically a sports car, but under the skin, pure American muscle. AMC 360 or Ford 351 V8s, gull-wing doors, safety bumpers, and futuristic vibes that were a decade too early. Just over 2,800 were made before the company collapsed. Most people mocked it back then. Too weird, too ambitious, too heavy. But now, the Bricklin is finally getting its respect as one of the most daring muscle-adjacent machines of the decade. Slide back into Mopar territory for the 1972 Plymouth Satellite Sebring Plus 400. With the GTX dead and the Roadrunner softened, the Satellite Sebring Plus stepped into the void. It came with a 400 cubic inch V8, rally suspension, and a look that said, "I used to fight, and I still could." It didn't have the name recognition, but it had the bones. These were the cars blue-collar guys bought when they couldn't swing a Cuda. Today they're relics, but the few that remain are gold mines for collectors willing to look past the nameplate. And how about the 1970 Mercury Cougar Eliminator Boss 302? You heard that right, Cougar, Boss, in one car. While everyone fixated on the Mustang, Mercury was building the same performance under a different badge, with more refinement and arguably better styling. Only around 2,267 Eliminators were built total in 1970, and Boss 302 equipped cars? Just 323. That's rarer than most Shelbys, and yet, for years they flew under the radar. Not anymore. The Boss Cougar combo is now one of the most sought-after sleeper classics in the entire Ford lineup. Now we're down to one of the most absurd and lovable oddballs ever made, the 1977 AMC Matador Machine Coupe. Big, bulky, misunderstood, but with optional 360 or 401 V8s, aggressive styling, and NASCAR heritage, the Matador Coupe was AMC's last gasp of big body muscle. Most people never took them seriously. They were too late to the party, but those who did, they know these cars were built to move. Clean ones are rare. Collectors are finally catching on. Let's round it off with something that never even had a fair shot. The 1970 Chevrolet Monte Carlo SS 454. First year Monte, first SS version. Chevy dropped a 454 LS5 under the hood, rated at 360 horsepower. And this wasn't a cruiser. This was a personal luxury car with serious muscle cred. It ran mid-14s in the quarter mile and looked like a gangster with a pension. Only 3,823 built that year, and far fewer survive. It sat in the shadow of the Chevelle too long, but no more. And finally, the 1971 Ford Mustang GT Sports Roof 429 Super Cobra Jet. Not a Mach 1, not a Boss, just GT. The last of the big block drag Mustangs, built for a world that was already changing. The 429 SCJ was a monster, 375 horsepower, a solid lifter cam, oil cooler, 4-bolt mains, and the drag pack. With 3.91 gears, it was built to race. But Ford only made a handful with this combo. Exact numbers vary, but it's likely under 300. Quietly one of the most brutal Mustangs Ford ever made, and now one of the hardest to find.